What would you do if the person you trusted the most in the world turned out to be the one who destroyed everything you worked for? This isn't a story of betrayal, it's a story of war. A war that began with one man's greed and ended with a woman's ultimate revenge. My husband Derek thought he had executed the perfect financial assassination. While I was deployed overseas serving our country for the third time, he systematically drained every account I had given him access to, sold our house, liquidated my known investments, and filed for divorce, citing abandonment. He left me with exactly $247 in a checking account and a mountain of debt he'd secretly accumulated in my name. What Derek didn't know was that buried deep in an encrypted military contractor account, protected by layers of security clearance, protocols he could never access, sat $3.2 billion from a defense technology patent I developed during my first tour in Afghanistan. He was about to learn that underestimating a female Army intelligence officer was the most expensive mistake of his life. Before we dive deeper into how I dismantled his entire world piece by piece, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. And if this story of a veteran's ultimate revenge resonates with you, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Because tomorrow, I've got an even more shocking story about a wife who discovered her husband's secret, family, and the brilliant way she exposed them all. The morning I received the divorce papers was February 14th, Valentine's Day. The irony wasn't lost on me as I sat in my temporary quarters at Bagram Airfield, reading through documents that detailed how my husband of 7 years had systematically destroyed what he thought was my entire financial foundation. According to his filing, I had abandoned our marriage for my military career, contributed nothing to our household, and owed him alimony despite his affair with my former best friend, Michelle Santos. I had been deployed to Afghanistan for 8 months, working on classified intelligence operations that I couldn't discuss with Derek or anyone outside my security clearance level. This was my third deployment since we'd married, and each time I left, Derek had grown more resentful of my service, more demanding about my attention, and more vocal about his belief that I was choosing the military over our marriage. What I thought was typical military spouse stress was actually something far more calculated and sinister. The divorce papers revealed that Derek had been planning this betrayal for over a year. While I was risking my life serving our country, he had been consulting with a divorce attorney named Bradford Pierce, a man who specialized in what he called high-asset extractions from military spouses. The strategy was elegant in its cruelty. Wait until the spouse was deployed and unreachable, then systematically dismantle their financial life while positioning them as the abandoning party in the marriage. Derek had withdrawn $89,000 from our joint savings account, claiming it was for home improvements that never happened. He'd sold our house in Colorado Springs for $340,000 and pocketing the entire amount by forging my signature on the closing documents. Most devastatingly, he'd liquidated my visible investment portfolio worth $156,000, telling the firms that I had given him power of attorney for all financial decisions during my deployment. Technically, that part was true. I had trusted him completely, but Derek's masterpiece of financial destruction didn't stop at theft. The papers revealed that he'd opened credit cards in my name, accumulated $78,000 in debt, then claimed I was financially irresponsible and unfit to manage money. He'd documented every time I'd been unreachable during classified operations, every delayed communication due to operational security, every missed anniversary or birthday because of mission requirements. In his narrative, I was a negligent wife who cared more about playing soldier than maintaining a marriage. The affair with Michelle made the betrayal complete. Michelle Rodriguez had been my closest friend since basic training, the person I trusted to check on Derek during my deployments, the woman who'd sworn she'd always have my back. The papers included photographic evidence of their relationship dating back 14 months, conveniently time-stamped to suggest I had driven Derek into another woman's arms through my repeated absences. According to Derek's financial affidavit, I was now worth $31,000 after accounting for the debt he'd accumulated and the assets he'd liquidated. He was requesting spousal support of $4,200 per month, claiming that his relationship with Michelle had helped him realize his worth and that he deserved compensation for years of being married to an absent, financially irresponsible soldier who had never prioritized their relationship. The audacity was breathtaking. Derek had systematically stolen everything I owned, destroyed my credit, positioned himself as the victim, and was now demanding I pay him for the privilege of having been betrayed. His attorney, Bradford Pierce, had clearly done this before. The documentation was too thorough, the strategy too sophisticated for this to be Derek's first time orchestrating such a complete financial annihilation. But Derek had made one critical error in his seemingly flawless plan. He had no idea what I actually did in the military or what I had accomplished during my previous deployments. While he'd been tracking my visible assets and planning their theft, he'd never discovered the classified work that had made me quietly wealthy beyond his wildest imagination. During my second deployment to Afghanistan in 2019, I'd been assigned to a joint task force working on counter-IED technology. As an intelligence officer with a background in electrical engineering, I'd been tasked with analyzing enemy bomb-making techniques and developing countermeasures, working 18-hour days in a reinforced bunker outside Kandahar. I developed a revolutionary detection algorithm that could identify improvised explosive devices through electromagnetic signature analysis. The technology I created didn't just save lives, it revolutionized military defensive capabilities. My algorithm could detect IEDs buried 3 ft underground, hidden in vehicle panels, or concealed in building materials with 97.3% accuracy. The defense contractor that licensed my patent, Aegis Defense Technologies, had quietly paid me $2 billion for exclusive rights to technology that would protect American forces for decades to come. The payment had been structured through a series of classified accounts, protected by multiple layers of military security protocols, and encrypted beyond Derek's ability to discover or access. My security clearance required that I keep the details confidential, even from my spouse. And the accounts were structured in a way that they wouldn't appear on any standard financial disclosure forms. Derek thought he was stealing from a soldier who earned $67,000 per year. He had no idea he was actually targeting someone worth more than most Fortune 500 CEOs. The money sat in accounts he could never access, managed by firms that specialized in protecting classified military assets, earning interests that exceeded Derek's entire annual income every single day. While he was celebrating what he thought was the perfect crime, stealing my life savings and planning to extract monthly payments from his destroyed wife, I was actually worth more than the GDP of small nations. But beyond the financial miscalculation, Derek had made an even more fundamental error. He had forgotten who he'd married. I wasn't just a soldier. I was an Army intelligence officer trained in psychological operations, strategic planning, and systematic investigation of complex threats. The same skills I used to hunt terrorists and dismantle enemy networks could be applied to civilian targets who had made the mistake of betraying me. Derek thought he was destroying a naive military wife who would return from deployment emotionally shattered and financially helpless. Instead, he had declared war on someone with unlimited financial resources, advanced intelligence training, and access to a network of military professionals who specialized in destroying enemies of the United States. As I sat in my quarters reading, through his betrayal, I felt something cold and calculating settle into my mind. This wasn't just personal anymore. Derek and Bradford Pierce had developed a system for financially destroying military spouses, and I was certain I wasn't their first victim. They had chosen to target people who served our country, believing that military deployment made us vulnerable and defenseless. They were about to discover that attacking a veteran with $3.2 billion and advanced intelligence training wasn't vulnerability. It was the beginning of the most thorough and devastating counter-operation of their lives. The secure satellite phone in my quarters rang at 0300 hours, 3 days after I'd received the divorce papers. The caller ID showed a number I recognized. Immediately. Colonel Patricia Vance, my commanding officer and the woman who'd personally recommended me for the Aegis defense contract. Patricia had been more than a superior officer over the years. She'd become a mentor who understood the unique challenges faced by women in military intelligence. Martinez. I heard about the situation back home. Patricia's voice was crisp and professional, but I could detect the underlying anger. Intel Network picked up chatter about your case. This isn't isolated. I sat up straighter, my training immediately shifting into operational mode. Ma'am, what kind of chatter? Your husband's attorney, Bradford Pierce, has been running this same operation on military spouses for 3 years. We've identified at least 12 other cases, all following identical patterns. Target-deployed service members systematically drain assets, forge documents, then position the spouse as the abandoning party. The son of AI has made it a specialty. The revelation hit me like a tactical strike. Derek wasn't just a cheating husband who'd gotten greedy. He was part of a systematic operation targeting people who served our country, exploiting the very sacrifices we made to protect America. The betrayal wasn't personal. It was institutional, calculated, and designed to destroy military families. Colonel, are you telling me this is an organized fraud operation? That's exactly what I'm telling you. Captain Pierce has extracted over $4.2 million from service members over the past 3 years. He recruits local men through social clubs and bars near military bases, coaches them on how to identify and marry female service members with assets, then provides the legal framework to steal everything during deployments. I stood up and began pacing my small quarters, my mind processing the intelligence with the systematic approach I'd learned to apply to enemy networks. What about the other victims? Ma'am, what happened to them? Patricia's pause told me everything I needed to know before she spoke. 3 discharged early due to financial stress. 2 are fighting credit destruction that's impacting their security clearances. 1 attempted suicide last year after losing her house and custody of her children. Martinez. These people are destroying the lives of American soldiers, and they're doing it while we're deployed serving our country. The cold fury that had been building since I'd read Derek's papers crystallized into something sharper and more focused. This wasn't just about my marriage anymore. This was about protecting other service members from a predatory network that had specifically targeted military families. Ma'am, I need to know everything about Bradford Pierce's operation. Client lists, financial records, legal strategies, everything. That's why I'm calling. Captain. Your situation gives us the first real opportunity to take down this entire network. Pice made one critical mistake when he targeted you. I could hear the satisfaction in Patricia's voice, and I suspected she knew about my Aegis contract and the resources it had provided me. Security clearances created strange relationships. People knew you had access to classified information without knowing the specifics, but they understood the implications. He doesn't know what he's dealing with, I said quietly. Exactly. Martinez. How would you feel about turning this into an unofficial intelligence operation? We can't use military resources directly, but if a private citizen with significant financial assets happened to conduct her own investigation into criminal fraud, the suggestion was clear. The military couldn't officially investigate a civilian attorney. But if I chose to use my personal resources to protect other service members, that was my prerogative as an American citizen. I understand. Colonel, consider this my personal mission. After ending the call, I opened my encrypted laptop and began accessing resources that Derek could never have imagined. The Aegis contract had provided me with more than money. It had established relationships with defense contractors, intelligence analysts, and private security firms that specialized in protecting military assets. Within 2 hours, I had assembled a team that would make Derek's simple divorce attorney look like an amateur playing against professionals. My first call was to Elena Vasquez, a former CIA analyst who now ran a private intelligence firm called Blackwater Investigations. Elena had worked with Aegis on several classified projects, and I trusted her discretion absolutely. More importantly, she specialized in investigating financial fraud operations that targeted government employees. Captain Martinez. "I've been waiting for this call," Elena said when I reached her secure line. "Word travels fast in our community. Your husband picked the wrong soldier to mess with. Elena, I need everything you can find on Bradford Pierce and his operation. Financial records, client lists, communication intercepts, legal filings, everything. Money is no object. Already started preliminary research when I heard about your situation. Pice is running a sophisticated operation, but he's gotten sloppy recently. Success made him overconfident, and overconfident criminals make mistakes." Elena's preliminary findings were staggering. Bradford Pierce operated through a network of 3 law firms in different states, all specializing in what they called military divorce strategy. He developed relationships with private investigators, financial consultants, and even a few corrupt court clerks who helped expedite proceedings while service members were deployed and couldn't defend themselves. The operation was more sophisticated than simple fraud. Pice had created a systematic approach to identifying, targeting, and destroying military spouses. He maintained databases of deployment schedules, financial profiles, and personal vulnerabilities of service members' families. Derek hadn't just stumbled into an affair and gotten greedy. He'd been recruited, coached, and guided through a process designed to extract maximum financial benefit from my service to our country. My second call was to Marcus Thompson, a former Army Ranger who now worked as a private security consultant specializing in asset protection for high net worth individuals. Marcus had been part of the security team that had protected me during the initial Aegis contract negotiations, and he understood both my military background and my current financial position. "Captain, heard you've got a situation that needs handling." Marcus's voice carried the calm confidence of someone who'd spent years dealing with complex threats. "How comprehensive do you want this response to be? Complete neutralization." "Marcus, I want Derek's operation dismantled, Bradford Pierce destroyed, and every service member they victimized compensated. This is a threat to military families, and I want it eliminated permanently." Marcus was quiet for a moment, processing the scope of what I was requesting. "That's not just divorce proceedings. Captain, that's a full-scale counterintelligence operation against a civilian target. Are you prepared for the resources and timeline that requires Marcus? I have $2 billion, and the motivation to spend every penny of it to protect other military families. How quickly can you assemble a team? 72 hours for initial deployment, 2 weeks for full operational capability. But Captain, once we start this kind of operation, there's no going back. These people are going to be completely destroyed professionally and financially." I thought about the other service members who'd been victimized, the woman who'd attempted suicide, the soldiers who'd been forced to discharge early due to financial destruction caused by people who'd exploited their service to America. Good. They chose to make war on American military families. Now they get to learn what happens when they pick a fight with someone who has unlimited resources and advanced training in destroying enemies. My third call was to Rebecca Chen, a military attorney who specialized in veterans' rights and had successfully prosecuted several high-profile cases of fraud against service members. Rebecca understood both the legal framework we'd need to operate within and the unique vulnerabilities that military families faced. Captain Martinez, I've been following Bradford Pierce's operation for 2 years, Rebecca said immediately. Every time I've tried to build a case, the victims have been too financially destroyed to fight back, or they've been pressured into settlements that include non-disclosure agreements. Rebecca, what would you need to take down Pice's entire network financial resources for a sustained legal campaign, evidence of the systematic nature of his operation, and victims willing to testify without fear of financial retaliation? I smiled, understanding that Derek's betrayal had actually provided me with the perfect opportunity to solve all three problems. Rebecca, I can provide unlimited financial resources. Elena Vasquez is gathering evidence of the systematic operation, and I can ensure that victims won't face financial retaliation because I'll cover all their costs and compensate them for their losses. Captain, that would cost millions of dollars. Rebecca, I have billions of dollars and a very personal interest in making sure Bradford Pierce never destroys another military family. The final piece of my team came from an unexpected source. Master Sergeant James Rodriguez, Michelle's older brother, called me directly on my personal phone. James was a career Special Forces operator who'd been deployed even more frequently than I had, and he'd always treated me like family during the years I'd been friends with his sister. Captain Martinez, I need to apologize for my sister and tell you something important about your husband. James's voice was tight with anger and embarrassment. Michelle confessed everything to our mother yesterday. She's been working with this lawyer Pierce for 8 months, specifically targeting you. The revelation that Michelle had been part of the operation from the beginning added another layer to the betrayal, but it also provided me with an intelligence asset inside their network. James, how much does Michelle know about their operation? Everything. Captain, she's been documenting her relationship with Derek, recording conversations with Pierce, even taking photographs of legal documents. She thought she was gathering evidence to protect herself, but she's actually documented their entire conspiracy. Is she willing to cooperate, Captain? My sister knows she betrayed a fellow soldier and a woman who treated her like family. She's ready to make this right, whatever it takes. By the end of my first week of operational planning, I had assembled a team that combined military intelligence expertise, unlimited financial resources, and insider access to Bradford Pierce's operation. Derek thought he'd destroyed a helpless military wife who would return from deployment financially ruined and emotionally shattered. Instead, he'd triggered a counterintelligence operation run by someone with $2 billion owes advanced training in destroying enemy networks and a very personal motivation to ensure that no other service member would ever be victimized by his criminal conspiracy. The war Derek had started was about to become the most expensive mistake of his life. The flight from Bram to Denver felt like the longest 18 hours of my life, not because of the distance, but because I was returning to a country where my own husband had systematically destroyed what he thought was my entire existence. As the plane descended through Colorado's familiar mountain ranges, I was carrying more than just my military gear. I had detailed intelligence files on Bradford Pierce's operation, encrypted communications equipment, and authorization to conduct what was essentially a civilian counterintelligence mission against domestic targets. My first stop wasn't home. There was no home anymore. Derek had sold our house while I was deployed, forged my signature on documents I'd never seen, and disappeared with every penny he could steal. Instead, I drove my rental car to an extended stay hotel in Colorado Springs. Threw me from the base where I'd started my military career 7 years earlier. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was essentially homeless in the country I'd spent years defending overseas. The hotel room became my temporary command center. Within 2 hours of arrival, I had transformed the small space into an intelligence operation hub that would have impressed my former commanding officers. Elena Vasquez had overnighted complete surveillance equipment. Rebecca Chen had delivered legal files documenting Pice's previous cases. And Marcus Thompson had provided secure communication systems that would keep our investigation completely invisible to our targets. My first objective was to understand the complete scope of Derek's betrayal. While I'd been serving overseas, he hadn't just been stealing money and sleeping with my best friend. He'd been systematically dismantling every aspect of the life we'd built together, piece by piece, with the methodical thoroughness of someone following a detailed playbook. The house sale was the most sophisticated part of his theft. Derek had used a power of attorney document I'd signed before my deployment, originally intended to let him handle routine financial matters in my absence, but Pice had helped him expand that limited authority into something much more comprehensive. Using forged addendums to the original document, Derek had granted himself complete control over all our joint assets, including real estate. The closing documents Elena had obtained showed that Derek had sold our house for $340,000, significantly below market value, to a buyer who turned out to be one of Pice's other clients. It was a shell transaction designed to hide assets while creating the appearance of legitimate financial distress. The house was immediately resold for $425,000 with the $85,000 profit split between Derek Pierce and the straw buyer. My home had become a prop in an elaborate financial fraud scheme, but the house was just the beginning. Derek had liquidated my investment portfolio using similar forged documents claiming emergency authority due to my deployment status. The $156,000 I'd carefully saved over 6 years of military service had been transferred to accounts I'd never authorized, then moved through a series of shell companies designed to make the money untraceable. Pice had clearly done this before the money laundering operation was far too sophisticated for Derek to have designed alone. The debt accumulation was perhaps the most vindictive aspect of Derek's betrayal. He'd opened 14 different credit accounts, using my military service record to establish credibility with lenders. Banks were eager to extend credit to a deployed Army officer with a spotless payment history and steady income. Derek had borrowed against my service record, my sacrifice, my reputation as a soldier who'd always met her obligations. The $78,000 in debt he'd accumulated wasn't random spending. Elena's investigation revealed that every purchase had been strategic, designed to support Pice's narrative that I was financially irresponsible and mentally unstable. Expensive jewelry gifts for Michelle, luxury vacations documented on social media while I was deployed, gambling losses at casinos that created a paper trail of addiction, even payments to a psychiatrist who specialized in military PTSD cases, all designed to build evidence that I was unfit to manage money or make rational decisions. The timeline of Derek's deception was equally sophisticated. Pice had coached him to begin documenting our marriage problems 18 months before filing for divorce, creating a narrative that I was increasingly absent, emotionally distant, and prioritizing military career over family obligations. Derek had been taking photographs of our empty house during my deployments, recording voicemails where I sounded tired or stressed from operations, even documenting delayed responses to his messages during classified missions. Every aspect of military life that should have generated pride and respect had been twisted into evidence of my failures as a wife. My combat decorations became proof that I was Viol Roan and potentially dangerous. My security clearance became evidence that I was secretive and dishonest. My deployment extensions became abandonment of marriage obligations. Pice had created a comprehensive psychological profile designed to make me appear unstable, unreliable, and undeserving of financial assets or spousal support. The most disturbing discovery came when I realized Derek hadn't just been targeting me randomly. Pierce's operations specifically recruited men who could access military spouses with substantial assets or earning potential. Derek had been introduced to Pierce through a social club that met near Fort Carson, where Pierce regularly gave presentations on protecting yourself financially during military marriages. He'd been coached to identify women with technical skills, security clearances, or family wealth that could be exploited during deployments. Michelle's role in the conspiracy was more extensive than I'd initially understood. She hadn't just been Derek's affair partner, she'd been his intelligence asset inside my personal life. For over a year, she'd been reporting on my financial discussions, my family relationships, my emotional state during deployments, even my conversations about military assignments and career plans. Everything I'd shared with my closest friend had been passed directly to the people planning my destruction. The recordings James Rodriguez provided revealed the systematic nature of Michelle's betrayal. She'd been coached by Pierce on specific questions to ask about my finances, my family background, my deployment schedules, even my mental health. Every coffee conversation, every phone call during my deployment, every moment of friendship had been an intelligence-gathering operation designed to identify vulnerabilities Pice could exploit in court. The other victims Elena had identified followed identical patterns. Pierce targeted military spouses in technical fields, intelligence roles, or specialized positions that generated higher incomes or had access to valuable benefits. The lawyer had identified that female service members often earned more than their civilian husbands and were frequently deployed for extended periods, making them perfect targets for systematic financial destruction. Each case followed the same playbook. Recruit and coach the husband. Establish legal justification for financial control. Systematically steal assets during deployment. Document evidence of the wife's supposed instability. Then file for divorce claiming abandonment and financial irresponsibility. Pice had refined the process to an art form, extracting maximum assets while positioning his clients as victims of negligent military wives. The scope of Pice's operation extended beyond individual divorces. He'd developed relationships with corrupt court clerks who expedited proceedings while service members were deployed and couldn't respond quickly. He'd established connections with financial institutions willing to process questionable power of attorney documents without proper verification. He'd even cultivated relationships with military family support groups, using them to identify potential targets and gather intelligence on deployment schedules. Most damning of all, Pierce had been documenting his own success. Elena's investigation uncovered detailed files where Pice tracked the financial destruction of each military family, calculated his percentage of extracted assets, and maintained what amounted to a hunting trophy collection of ruined lives. He turned the systematic betrayal of American service members into a business model, complete with performance metrics and revenue projections. The intelligence gathering phase confirmed what I'd suspected from the beginning. Derek wasn't just a cheating husband who'd gotten greedy. He was a recruited asset in a criminal enterprise specifically designed to exploit and destroy military families. Pierce had weaponized the very qualities that made military spouses vulnerable: their service deployments, their dedication to duty, their trust in their families back home, and turned those sacrifices into opportunities for systematic theft. But Pierce had made one critical miscalculation in his apparently successful operation. He'd assumed that military spouses were inherently vulnerable because their service obligations made them unable to fight back effectively. He'd built his entire business model on the premise that deployed soldiers couldn't access the resources or expertise necessary to challenge his sophisticated legal and financial manipulation. Derek thought he'd married and betrayed a typical Army officer who earned $67,000 per year and had accumulated modest savings over 6 years of service. Pice thought he was running his standard operation against another vulnerable military spouse who could be easily destroyed and discarded. Neither of them had any idea they just declared war on someone with $2 billion or advanced intelligence, training, and unlimited motivation to ensure their complete destruction. The revelation of my true financial position required careful orchestration. Derek and Pierce believed they were dealing with a financially devastated Army captain who had returned from deployment to discover her life in ruins. They had no idea that the woman they'd systematically betrayed was actually worth more than most Fortune 500 companies, with resources that dwarfed their entire criminal operation by several orders of magnitude. The Aegis defense contract had been classified at the highest levels for 3 years, known only to a select group of Pentagon officials, defense contractors, and the specialized financial institutions that managed payments for classified military technology. Even my commanding officers knew only that I had developed valuable intellectual property. The specific details and monetary value remained compartmentalized information that required presidential-level security clearance to access. The $3.2 billion payment had been structured through Blackstone Military Assets, a specialized firm that managed classified payments for defense contractors. The money sat in multiple encrypted accounts protected by layers of military security protocols that were literally impossible for civilian investigators to penetrate. Derek's power of attorney, even if it had been legitimate, couldn't have accessed accounts that required biometric verification, classified codes that changed daily, and authorization from Pentagon officials who didn't officially exist. The irony was breathtaking. While Derek had been stealing what he thought were my life savings, I had been earning more money in daily interest than he made in an entire year. While Pice had been calculating his percentage of what he believed was a middle-class military divorce, the actual assets involved exceeded the GDP of most small nations. They'd been playing checkers while targeting someone who owned the entire chess set. The technology I developed wasn't just valuable, it was revolutionary. My electromagnetic signature analysis algorithm had solved a problem that had plagued military forces for decades. Improvised explosive devices had killed more American soldiers in Iraq and Afghanistan than any other single threat. And existing detection methods were slow, unreliable, and required dangerous proximity to potential bombs. My algorithm changed everything. Using advanced electromagnetic field analysis combined with machine learning protocols I'd developed during my engineering graduate work, the system could identify IEDs from safe distances with unprecedented accuracy. More importantly, it could distinguish between actual threats and false positives, reducing the time and resources wasted on harmless metal objects that triggered conventional detectors. The development process had consumed 2 years of 18-hour days in reinforced bunkers outside Kandahar, working with a team of 3 other engineers and 2 computer specialists. I'd tested thousands of configurations against real explosive devices provided by Army demolition experts. We'd analyzed electromagnetic signatures from over 12,000 different bomb configurations, creating a database that allowed the algorithm to identify new threats based on pattern recognition rather than simple metal detection. The breakthrough came during my 18th month in Afghanistan, when I realized that different explosive compounds created distinct electromagnetic disturbances when combined with metal components. By mapping these signatures and cross-referencing them with structural analysis of common IED configurations, I could create a detection system that was essentially impossible to fool or circumvent. Aegis Defense Technologies had been monitoring military research for exactly this kind of innovation. When my commanding officers submitted my preliminary research through classified channels, Aegis immediately recognized the strategic value of technology that could protect American forces while providing significant commercial applications for law enforcement and security industries worldwide. The negotiation process had been surreal. Pentagon officials, who I'd never met, flew to Afghanistan to discuss patent rights and licensing agreements in a secure facility that looked more like a science fiction movie than a military installation. Aegis executives participated through encrypted video links discussing financial terms that exceeded anything I'd ever imagined possible. The final agreement was structured as a combination of immediate payment, ongoing royalties, and exclusive licensing rights. Aegis paid $3.2 billion for complete ownership of my algorithm, plus an additional $50 million annually for consulting and improvement services. They also established a separate research fund worth $100 million, allowing me to continue developing related technologies under their sponsorship. The payment structure had been designed to protect both the technology and my personal security, rather than a single massive transfer that might attract attention. The money was distributed across multiple classified accounts, managed by different financial institutions that specialized in defense contractor payments. Each account was protected by military-grade encryption and required multiple forms of authentication that were impossible to forge or duplicate. The most sophisticated security measure was the temporal verification system. My accounts could only be accessed during specific time windows that corresponded to classified satellite schedules, even with correct biometric data and security codes. The accounts remained locked unless accessed during predetermined periods that changed weekly based on orbital positioning data known only to Pentagon security officials. Derek's attempts to locate hidden assets had been laughably inadequate. He'd hired a private investigator who specialized in finding concealed civilian accounts, someone who understood offshore banking and domestic asset protection strategies. But civilian financial investigation techniques were completely useless against military security protocols that had been designed to protect national security assets from foreign intelligence services. The investigator had spent 3 months searching for hidden accounts using standard databases, credit monitoring services, and financial institution records. He'd found nothing because there was nothing to find in civilian financial systems. My wealth existed in a parallel universe of classified accounts that didn't appear on any database accessible to private investigators, divorce attorneys, or even most government agencies. The security clearance required to access information about my accounts was so high that fewer than 200 people in the entire United States government had authorization to know the accounts existed. Derek and Pierce had been trying to steal assets that were protected by the same security measures used to safeguard nuclear launch codes and foreign intelligence operations. But beyond the financial revelation, my true position was enhanced by resources and relationships that Derek couldn't have imagined. The Aegis contract had established me as a recognized defense technology expert, creating relationships with private military contractors, intelligence agencies, and specialized firms that operated in the gray areas between military and civilian law enforcement. Marcus Thompson's security firm represented just one example of the resources now available to me. Blackwater Investigations had contracts with 12 different government agencies and maintained relationships with intelligence operatives throughout the world. Elena Vasquez's analytical capabilities exceeded anything available to civilian law enforcement using techniques and databases that were typically reserved for counterterrorism operations. The network effect of my military and defense contractor relationships meant that I could access expertise and resources that were simply unavailable to people operating in civilian systems. When I needed financial investigation, I could hire former CIA analysts. When I needed legal strategy, I could consult with attorneys who specialized in national security law. When I needed surveillance or intelligence gathering, I could engage firms that typically worked for the Pentagon. Derrick had been planning his betrayal for over a year, believing he was targeting a vulnerable military wife who would be helpless against his sophisticated legal and financial manipulation. Pice had been confident that his systematic approach would work because it had succeeded against other service members who lacked the resources to fight back effectively. Neither of them had considered the possibility that they might be targeting someone whose military service had generated not just modest savings and a steady paycheck, but connections to intelligence communities and defense contractors that operated with virtually unlimited resources and no restrictions on the methods they could employ against civilian targets who threatened military families. The revelation of my true position wasn't just about money, though $3.222 billion certainly provided options that Derrick and Pierce couldn't anticipate. More importantly, my status as a valued defense contractor meant that their systematic attack on my assets and reputation constituted a threat to someone whose continued cooperation was considered essential to national security interests. When Pice filed legal documents claiming that I was mentally unstable and financially irresponsible, he wasn't just attacking a random army captain. He was targeting someone whose psychological evaluations were reviewed annually by Pentagon security officials, whose financial management was monitored by specialized accountants who handled classified payments, and whose professional competence was considered critical to protecting American forces overseas. Derrick thought he'd married a soldier who would always be subordinate to his civilian authority and financial control. Pierce thought he'd identified another vulnerable military spouse who could be systematically destroyed without consequences. Both of them were about to discover that they'd declared war on someone whose true position made their entire criminal operation looked like children playing with toys they didn't understand. The intelligence gathering phase of my operation began with the systematic analysis of Bradford Pierce's entire criminal network. Using techniques I'd perfected during counterterrorism operations in Afghanistan. Within 72 hours of establishing my command center in Colorado Springs, I had assembled a team that would have impressed Pentagon strategists, combining unlimited financial resources with military-grade investigation capabilities. Elena Vasquez arrived from Washington, D.C. with equipment that transformed my hotel room into a sophisticated surveillance center. Her team had already begun preliminary reconnaissance on Pice's law firm, identifying communication patterns, financial relationships, and operational procedures that revealed the true scope of his criminal enterprise. The initial intelligence was staggering in its implications. Captain Pierce isn't just running a divorce scam, Elena reported, spreading surveillance photographs across my desk. He's operating a systematic fraud network that targets military families with the precision of a foreign intelligence operation. We've identified connections to 17 different law firms across 12 states, all following identical operational patterns. The photographs showed Pice meeting with various individuals in locations ranging from high-end restaurants to military-based social clubs. Each meeting followed a pattern. Pice would identify potential recruits among military spouses, evaluate their access to service members with valuable assets, then provide training on how to systematically exploit deployment vulnerabilities. Elena's team had also uncovered Pice's recruitment strategy, which was far more sophisticated than simple opportunistic fraud. He maintained detailed databases of military deployment schedules, accessed through corrupt contacts in base administrative offices. He tracked promotion patterns, security clearance levels, and even family financial records obtained through illegal data purchases from compromised financial institutions. Look at this, Elena continued, opening a laptop that displayed Pice's internal communications. He's been building profiles of high-value targets for over 5 years. Your husband wasn't randomly recruited. You were specifically identified as a priority target based on your intelligence background and technical expertise. The communications revealed that PICE had been tracking my career progression since my second deployment, noting my promotion to captain, my assignment to classified projects, and even my graduate education in electrical engineering. He'd identified me as what he called a premium extraction opportunity, a military spouse with high earning potential and probable access to valuable intellectual property. Derek's recruitment had been carefully orchestrated over an 18-month period. PICE had arranged for Derek to meet specific individuals at social events, gradually introducing him to concepts of financial self-P protection and marriage asset management. The conversations had been designed to plant seeds of resentment about military marriages, emphasizing the sacrifices that civilian spouses made for their partners' careers. Marcus Thompson's security team provided the physical surveillance that complemented Elena's digital intelligence. Within 48 hours, they had established comprehensive monitoring of Pierce's movements, communication patterns, and financial activities. The results revealed criminal behavior that extended far beyond simple divorce fraud. Pierce is laundering money through a network of shell companies. Marcus reported during our first operational briefing. The assets he steals from military spouses aren't just being distributed to his clients. He's using stolen funds to finance other criminal enterprises, including identity theft operations and financial fraud schemes targeting elderly veterans. The scope was breathtaking. Pierce had created what amounted to a criminal enterprise that used stolen military family assets to fund additional crimes against other vulnerable populations. The divorce fraud was just the beginning. It provided capital for larger operations that systematically exploited people who had served our country. Marcus's team had also discovered PICE's operational security measures, which were surprisingly sophisticated for a civilian criminal organization. He used encrypted communications, regularly changed meeting locations, and maintained multiple sets of financial records designed to confuse law enforcement investigations. PICE understood that targeting military families would eventually attract federal attention, and he'd prepared defensive measures accordingly. The most disturbing intelligence came from Rebecca Chen's legal investigation, which revealed the systematic corruption PICE had established within the court system itself. Her research identified at least 6 court clerks, 3 family court judges, and multiple court-appointed mediators who had been accepting payments to expedite Pierce's cases and rule favorably on his motions. Captain Pierce has essentially purchased segments of the family court system, Rebecca explained, showing me documented payments disguised as legal consulting fees. He's not just manipulating individual cases. He's corrupted the entire process. That's supposed to protect military families during divorce proceedings. The corruption extended to court-appointed psychologists who provided biased evaluations of military spouses, financial advisors who created misleading asset assessments, and even private investigators who filed false reports supporting PICE's narratives of abandonment and financial irresponsibility. PICE had created a comprehensive system designed to guarantee favorable outcomes regardless of the actual facts of each case. But the most valuable intelligence asset proved to be Michelle Rodriguez, whose cooperation provided unprecedented access to PICE's operational planning. James Rodriguez had convinced his sister to document everything about her involvement in the conspiracy, creating a detailed record of PICE's methods and future targets. Michelle's recordings revealed PICE's strategic planning process, which treated military families like military targets to be analyzed and systematically destroyed. He maintained detailed psychological profiles of both service members and their spouses, identifying emotional vulnerabilities that could be exploited during the systematic betrayal process. Derek was coached on specific conversation techniques designed to make you feel guilty about your service commitments. Michelle had recorded during one of her meetings with Pierce. Pice provided scripts for arguments about your deployments, your dedication to military career over marriage, even your relationships with other soldiers. Every fight you had was carefully orchestrated to create documentation for divorce proceedings. The recordings also revealed Pice's expansion plans, which included targeting military spouses in specialized fields like cybersecurity, intelligence analysis, and advanced technology development. He'd identified that these service members often had access to valuable intellectual property or security clearances that could be exploited for additional financial gain beyond simple asset theft. Elena's digital forensics team uncovered Pierce's financial tracking systems, which showed the true scale of his criminal enterprise. Over 5 years, Pice had extracted over $12 million from military families, with individual cases ranging from $50,000 to $800,000 in stolen assets. The systematic nature of the theft was documented in spreadsheets that tracked extraction rates, legal costs, and profit margins for each operation. The financial records also revealed Pierce's client payment structure, which created incentives for maximum financial destruction. Rather than charging flat legal fees, Pice received percentage payments based on the total assets extracted from each military spouse. This created motivation to destroy families as completely as possible, since Pice's compensation increased with the level of financial devastation he could achieve. Marcus Thompson's investigation revealed the physical infrastructure supporting Pice's operation, including safe houses where stolen assets were temporarily stored, private investigation firms that specialized in surveillance of military families, and even identity theft operations that created false documentation for his clients' asset concealment activities. Pice has been treating this like a military operation, Marcus observed. He's established command structure, operational security, intelligence gathering, and systematic execution protocols. This isn't amateur criminal activity. It's professional warfare against American military families. The intelligence gathering phase also revealed Pice's defensive preparations against potential federal investigation. He maintained multiple escape plans, including offshore accounts, false identity documentation, and even preliminary arrangements for fleeing to countries without extradition treaties with the United States. But Pice's most significant defensive measure was his systematic documentation of corruption within the court system itself. He'd been recording his interactions with corrupt judges and court officials, creating what amounted to blackmail material designed to prevent cooperation with federal investigations. Pice understood that his criminal enterprise would eventually attract serious law enforcement attention, and he'd prepared to destroy evidence and intimidate witnesses accordingly. The intelligence picture that emerged after 1 week of investigation revealed a criminal conspiracy that exceeded anything I'd encountered during counterterrorism operations overseas. Pice had created a systematic attack on American military families that was more sophisticated, more damaging, and more extensively planned than many foreign intelligence operations I'd helped dismantle in Afghanistan. Derek wasn't just a cheating husband who'd gotten greedy. He was a recruited asset in what amounted to a domestic terrorism operation specifically designed to destroy the families of people serving our country. Pice had weaponized the legal system, corrupted court officials, and created financial mechanisms that turned military service into a vulnerability to be systematically exploited. The scope of evidence: Elena, Marcus, and Rebecca had compiled within 1 week exceeded what most federal investigations accumulated over months of formal proceedings. But more importantly, the intelligence revealed that Pice's operation was preparing to expand significantly, with plans to target high-value military spouses in specialized technical fields. I was looking at a criminal enterprise that had already destroyed dozens of military families and was preparing to systematically attack many more. The personal betrayal Derek had orchestrated was just one small component of a larger war being waged against American service members and their families. The intelligence gathering phase was complete. Now it was time to begin the systematic destruction of everyone involved in PICE's criminal network using resources and capabilities they couldn't have imagined possible. The strategic counterattack phase required careful coordination and precise timing to ensure that Derek and Pierce committed to their most damaging actions before discovering they were walking into a trap. Using techniques I'd perfected during psychological operations in Afghanistan, I began feeding carefully crafted disinformation through channels they trusted, manipulating their decision-making process while they remained completely unaware of my true capabilities. The first element of my strategy involved establishing apparent financial desperation. Derek needed to believe that his theft had been completely successful and that I was struggling to survive on my military salary alone. Elena Vasquez helped me create a series of financial transactions that would appear in databases PICE's investigators could access, showing apparent attempts to secure emergency loans, sell personal possessions, and access military emergency financial assistance programs. I opened accounts at local banks near Fort Carson, making small deposits that suggested I was living paycheck to paycheck. I applied for credit cards that would be denied due to the debt Derek had accumulated in my name, creating a paper trail of financial rejection that would reinforce PICE's narrative about my supposed fiscal irresponsibility. Most importantly, I began making inquiries about military family emergency loans, ensuring that PICE's contacts in base administrative offices would report my apparent financial distress. The psychological manipulation required more subtlety. Derek needed to feel confident about his strategy while being encouraged to accelerate his timeline and commit to more aggressive actions. Michelle Rodriguez became my unwitting asset in this process, following carefully scripted conversations designed to make Derek believe I was emotionally unstable and legally vulnerable. Derek's really excited about the preliminary hearing next week. Michelle reported during one of her recorded conversations with James. PICE has convinced him that you're going to break down in court and agree to whatever settlement they propose. Derek thinks you're so overwhelmed by the debt and the deployment stress that you'll just want the whole thing to be over quickly. The recordings Michelle provided showed that Derek was becoming increasingly confident and careless. PICE had convinced him that military spouses rarely fought back effectively against sophisticated legal strategies, especially when they were facing financial destruction and emotional trauma. Derek was planning to attend court proceedings with Michelle, apparently believing that displaying his new relationship would intimidate me into accepting unfavorable terms. Meanwhile, Marcus Thompson's team was implementing surveillance countermeasures that kept PICE's investigators from discovering the true extent of my resources. They identified every private investigator Pierce had hired to monitor my activities, then fed them carefully constructed information about my supposed financial struggles and emotional instability. Marcus's operatives followed Pierce's surveillance teams, photographing them while they photographed me, creating a comprehensive record of their illegal investigation activities. More importantly, they began feeding PICE's investigators false information about my daily activities, making it appear that I was spending time at financial counseling services, military family support programs, and even psychiatric facilities. Pierce's. People are documenting every fake crisis we've created. Marcus reported with satisfaction. They think they're gathering evidence of your breakdown, but they're actually creating a detailed record of their own surveillance crimes and evidence fabrication. Rebecca Chen coordinated the legal misdirection, filing preliminary responses that would make Pierce believe his strategy was working perfectly. Her court filings appeared desperate and poorly researched, suggesting that I was represented by overworked military legal assistance lawyers who lacked the resources to challenge Pierce's sophisticated fraud evidence. Rebecca's strategy was particularly elegant because it established grounds for later proving that Pice had knowingly exploited my supposed lack of legal representation. She filed motions that contained deliberate technical errors, creating opportunities for Pice to exploit procedural advantages while documenting his willingness to take advantage of apparently inadequate legal counsel. The financial misdirection required coordination with Elena's intelligence team to ensure that Pice's investigations would uncover exactly the information we wanted him to find. Elena created false financial records showing that I was attempting to hide modest assets from the divorce proceedings, giving Pice evidence of supposed financial deception that would support his narrative while actually proving his willingness to pursue assets through illegal means. Elena's team also began planting evidence that I was attempting to access military emergency financial assistance programs, making it appear that I was so financially desperate that I was violating military regulations about outside financial support. This would encourage Pice to accelerate his timeline, believing that military discipline proceedings might interfere with his civil fraud operation. The most sophisticated element of the misdirection involved my apparent emotional state. Using techniques from military psychological operations training, I began exhibiting carefully controlled signs of stress and breakdown that would be visible to Pierce's surveillance teams while actually maintaining complete operational control. I made public appearances at military family counseling services, ensuring that Pice's investigators would photograph me entering and leaving facilities that treated deployment stress and family crisis situations. I staged arguments with bank representatives about loan denials, creating public scenes that would support Pice's claims about my financial desperation and emotional instability. The key was ensuring that every piece of false information Pice received actually incriminated him further while advancing his confidence in his criminal strategy. His investigators were documenting activities that would later prove their systematic surveillance and evidence fabrication. While Pice was being encouraged to pursue increasingly aggressive legal strategies that would demonstrate his criminal intent, Derrick's behavior during this period revealed the true depth of his betrayal and his complete lack of understanding about what he was actually targeting. Michelle's recording showed him celebrating what he believed was my financial and emotional destruction, planning how to spend money he thought he was successfully stealing. Even discussing future criminal operations Pice might help him conduct against other military families. Derrick asked Pierce about targeting other wives in his architecture firm who are married to military men. Michelle recorded during one particularly damning conversation. Pierce told him this was just the beginning, that they could build a systematic operation targeting military spouses throughout the Colorado Springs area. The recordings revealed that Derrick had completely embraced Pice's criminal worldview, viewing military families as legitimate targets for systematic exploitation. He wasn't just a husband who had gotten greedy. He had become a recruit in Pierce's war against American service members and their families. Pierce's communications during this period showed increasing confidence and carelessness. He was coordinating with corrupt court officials to expedite our case, arranging for biased psychological evaluations, and even planning media strategy to publicize our divorce as an example of military marriage failures. Pice was treating my case as a showcase for his criminal methods, planning to use my apparent destruction as marketing material for recruiting additional clients. The strategic misdirection phase achieved exactly what I had intended. Pice and Derrick were completely committed to their criminal strategy, believing they were days away from their greatest financial extraction success. They had documented their own crimes extensively, accelerated their timeline based on false information, and positioned themselves for maximum legal and financial exposure. Neither Derek nor Pierce had any idea that every move they made was being monitored, recorded, and documented by a team of former intelligence professionals using unlimited financial resources. They thought they were hunting a vulnerable military wife who was too overwhelmed to fight back effectively. Instead, they were walking directly into the most comprehensive counterintelligence operation either of them would ever encounter, orchestrated by someone whose true capabilities would destroy their entire criminal enterprise permanently. The confrontation began at 8:47 a.m. on a crisp Tuesday morning in Jefferson County Family Court, where Derek and Pierce believed they were arriving to finalize the systematic destruction of a helpless military wife. Derek walked into the courthouse wearing his most expensive suit, accompanied by Michelle Rodriguez, apparently confident that this would be his victory parade. Pice carried 3 briefcases filled with what he believed was overwhelming evidence of my financial irresponsibility and emotional instability. Neither of them noticed the coordinated team of federal agents positioned throughout the courthouse or the specialized equipment that Elena Vasquez's technical team had installed to record every word of the proceedings. They had no idea that what they thought was a routine divorce hearing was actually the culmination of a federal investigation that would destroy their entire criminal network. I arrived 30 minutes before the scheduled hearing, accompanied by Rebecca Chen and what appeared to be a small team of military legal assistance lawyers. Derek and Pierce observed our modest entourage with obvious satisfaction, believing that I was represented by overworked military attorneys who lacked the resources to challenge their sophisticated fraud evidence. The reality was that Rebecca's assistants were actually federal prosecutors, FBI financial crimes specialists, and Elena Vasquez herself operating under court-authorized investigation protocols. Judge Patricia Morrison called the proceedings to order. Unaware that she was presiding over what would become one of the largest military family fraud prosecutions in federal history, Pice stood to present his opening statement, confident that the evidence he'd fabricated and the surveillance he'd conducted would establish my unfitness as a spouse and my supposed abandonment of marriage obligations. Your Honor, this case represents a clear example of a military spouse who has prioritized career over family obligations. Pice began, his voice carrying the polished confidence of someone who had successfully destroyed dozens of military families. Mrs. Carter has repeatedly chosen military deployment over marriage stability, demonstrating a pattern of abandonment that has forced my client to make difficult decisions about his financial security. Pierce's presentation was masterful in its deception. He displayed photographs of our empty house during my deployments, presented financial records showing my supposed irresponsible spending, and even introduced testimony from corrupt witnesses who claimed to have observed my erratic behavior and emotional instability. Every piece of evidence had been carefully fabricated or manipulated to support his narrative of spousal abandonment and financial incompetence. Derek took the witness stand with obvious satisfaction, testifying about my supposed neglect of marriage, obligations, and my failure to contribute financially to our household. His performance was polished and convincing, clearly the result of extensive coaching from Pice about how to present himself as the victim of an absent military wife who cared more about playing soldier than maintaining a family. She was never really present in our marriage. Derek testified with practiced emotion. Even when she was home between deployments, she was always focused on her computer work, her military training, her next assignment. I felt like I was married to someone who treated our relationship as a secondary priority to her career ambitions. The testimony was devastating and would have been completely convincing to anyone who didn't know the truth about my classified work and actual financial position. Derek described years of supposed emotional neglect, financial irresponsibility, and military obligations that interfered with marriage stability. Pice guided him through responses that painted me as an absent wife who had forced him to seek emotional and physical comfort elsewhere. Pierce then called Michelle Rodriguez to testify about my supposed emotional instability and the deterioration of my marriage. Michelle's testimony was particularly painful to hear as she described intimate conversations we'd had during my deployments, twisting moments of vulnerability and stress into evidence of mental breakdown and spousal inadequacy. She would call me crying about military stress, complaining about Derek, even talking about whether military life was worth the sacrifice. Michelle testified, her voice carefully modulated to suggest concern rather than betrayal. I was genuinely worried about her psychological state and whether she was capable of maintaining a stable relationship. The first 3 hours of proceedings went exactly as Pice had planned. He presented overwhelming evidence of my supposed abandonment, financial irresponsibility, and emotional instability. Derek and Michelle provided coordinated testimony that painted me as an unfit spouse who had driven her husband into another woman's arms through years of neglect and military-focused priorities. Judge Morrison appeared genuinely convinced by Pice's presentation. The evidence was comprehensive. The witnesses seemed credible, and the narrative of military marriage failure was unfortunately common in family courts near military bases. Pice was clearly preparing for his final argument, demanding substantial spousal support and complete asset forfeit when Rebecca Chen stood to present our defense. Your Honor, before we respond to Mr. for Pierce's allegations, we need to address some preliminary matters regarding the authenticity of evidence and the scope of this court's jurisdiction. Rebecca said quietly, "We're requesting an immediate recess to present new evidence that has recently come to our attention." PI objected immediately, clearly concerned about any delay that might allow me to gather additional resources or legal support. Your Honor, the plaintiff has had months to prepare their defense. We object to any continuance that would delay resolution of this matter. Judge Morrison was clearly torn between Pice's reasonable objection and Rebecca's formal request for additional time. What she didn't know was that Rebecca's new evidence was actually a coordinated federal investigation that had been building for weeks, waiting for this exact moment to reveal itself. I'll allow a 30-minute recess. Judge Morrison decided Mrs. Carter's counsel may present any additional evidence, but this hearing will conclude today. During the recess, the courthouse transformation was swift and dramatic. Federal agents who had been posing as court personnel revealed their identities and began securing all exits. Elena Vasquez activated recording equipment that had been documenting every word of Pierce's fraudulent testimony. Marcus Thompson's security team established perimeter control to prevent anyone from leaving the building. Derek and Pierce spent the recess celebrating what they believed was their inevitable victory. Completely unaware that federal agents were positioning themselves throughout the courthouse, Michelle Rodriguez was reviewing her testimony with Pierce, preparing for what they thought would be final arguments that would complete my financial and legal destruction. When court reconvened, Rebecca Chen called her first witness, Elena Vasquez, identified as a federal investigator specializing in financial crimes against military families. Derek's confident expression immediately shifted to confusion, then growing alarm as Elena was sworn in and began presenting evidence that would destroy Pierce's entire criminal enterprise. Your Honor, Mrs. Carter has been the subject of systematic financial fraud orchestrated by Mr. Pierce and executed by her husband over the past 18 months. Elena testified, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent weeks documenting every aspect of their criminal conspiracy. The evidence Mr. Pierce has presented today consists primarily of fabricated documents, falsified financial records, and testimony from witnesses who have been coached to commit perjury. Elena's presentation was devastating in its precision. She displayed real financial records showing Derek's systematic theft, authenticated communications between Pierce and his criminal network, and documented evidence of the surveillance and evidence fabrication that had supported Pice's case. Every piece of evidence Pice had presented was systematically dismantled and revealed as fraudulent. Derek's face went completely white as Elena presented recordings of his conversations with Pice, planning my financial destruction and celebrating what they believed was successful theft of my assets. Pice was frantically taking notes, clearly trying to calculate his legal exposure as Elena methodically destroyed every element of his carefully constructed fraud. The courtroom atmosphere shifted from routine divorce proceedings to federal criminal investigation as Elena continued presenting evidence that revealed the scope of Pice's operation against military families. Judge Morrison's expression changed from judicial neutrality to horrified comprehension as she realized she had been presiding over an elaborate criminal conspiracy. Derrick and Pierce had walked into court believing they were about to complete the perfect crime against a helpless military wife. Instead, they were watching federal investigators systematically dismantle their entire criminal enterprise while documenting their guilt for prosecution purposes. The final phase of justice unfolded with the methodical precision of a military operation as Derrick and Pierce discovered that their systematic betrayal of American military families had attracted the full attention of federal law enforcement agencies. What they had believed was a simple divorce proceeding became the foundation for prosecutions that would dismantle their entire criminal network and establish new protections for military spouses nationwide. The immediate courtroom aftermath was swift and devastating. Judge Morrison declared an emergency recess and ordered all parties to remain in the courthouse while federal agents secured the building. Derrick sat in stunned silence as FBI agents read him his rights, his confident demeanor replaced by the horrified realization that his perfect crime had been thoroughly documented by the very person he thought he was destroying. Pice's reaction was more dramatic as he fully understood the scope of his legal exposure. Federal prosecutors presented evidence of his systematic fraud operation spanning 5 years, 17 states, and 43 documented victims. The RICO charges alone carried potential sentences that would ensure Pierce never operated another criminal enterprise, while the additional charges of conspiracy, money laundering, and systematic fraud against military families added decades to his potential imprisonment. Michelle Rodriguez broke down completely when confronted with recordings of her own voice documenting the conspiracy. Her cooperation with federal investigators had provided crucial evidence, but her active participation in Derrick's betrayal still carried serious legal consequences. The immunity agreement she eventually negotiated required complete cooperation with ongoing investigations and significant community service focused on supporting military families. The financial recovery process revealed the true scope of Pice's criminal enterprise. Federal asset seizure operations recovered over $2 million in stolen funds from military families hidden in accounts throughout the United States and several offshore banking centers. Derrick's portion of the stolen assets, including money from our house sale and my liquidated investments, was recovered within 48 hours of his arrest. But the personal recovery went far beyond simple financial restitution. The revelation of my true financial position transformed the entire narrative from military wife victim to wealthy defense contractor who had systematically dismantled a criminal organization. Derrick had stolen what he thought was my life savings, unaware that he was actually targeting someone whose daily interest earnings exceeded his annual income. The media coverage of the case established new awareness about systematic fraud targeting military families. Rebecca Chen coordinated with federal prosecutors to ensure that the story highlighted the vulnerability of deployed service members and the sophisticated methods criminals use to exploit military families. The coverage led to congressional hearings about protecting military spouses and new federal legislation, specifically addressing deployment-related financial crimes. The prosecution phase took 14 months, during which Elena Vasquez's investigation expanded to identify Pice's complete criminal network. Federal agents arrested 37 individuals across 12 states, including corrupt court officials, fraudulent financial advisors, and private investigators who had specialized in surveillance of military families. The systematic nature of Pice's operation had created evidence trails that led investigators to criminal enterprises they had never suspected existed. Derek's trial was particularly satisfying because it forced him to confront the complete scope of his miscalculation. Federal prosecutors presented evidence showing that while he was stealing what he thought was $485,000 in total assets, he was actually targeting someone worth $2 billion who had unlimited resources for prosecution and recovery. The mathematical absurdity of his crime became a central element of the case, demonstrating the complete failure of Pice's intelligence gathering about high V-value military targets. The sentencing phase provided closure that exceeded anything I had imagined possible when I first discovered Derek's betrayal. Derek received 18 years in federal prison, followed by 10 years of supervised release, during which he would be required to make restitution payments to military family support organizations. His assets, including money from affairs with other women and investments made with stolen military spouse funds, were seized and distributed to victim compensation programs. Pierce's sentence of 35 years in federal prison reflected the systematic nature of his crimes and his role as the architect of an enterprise that had destroyed dozens of military families. The judge specifically noted that Pice had weaponized the legal system against people serving our country, turning military deployment into a vulnerability that criminals could exploit for profit. His law license was permanently revoked, and his assets were seized to fund victim restitution and military family protection programs. The broader impact of the prosecutions extended far beyond individual justice. The Department of Defense established new protocols for protecting military spouses' financial assets during deployments, including mandatory financial counseling and enhanced legal protections for service members' families. Military family support organizations received significant federal funding to provide emergency assistance and legal representation for families facing deployment-related financial crimes. My personal transformation was perhaps the most profound consequence of the entire experience. The quiet Army intelligence officer who had trusted her husband completely evolved into a recognized advocate for military family protection and a specialist in investigating financial crimes against service members. The Aegis defense contract had provided financial resources, but Derek's betrayal had revealed capabilities and connections that transformed my understanding of my own potential. The foundation I established using a portion of my defense contractor earnings became a model for protecting military families from systematic exploitation. The Carter Foundation for Military Family Security provided emergency financial assistance, legal representation, and investigative services for military spouses facing deployment-related crimes. Within 2 years, the foundation had helped over 200 families and established partnerships with federal agencies to identify and prosecute criminal enterprises targeting military communities. The technology development work that had originally generated my wealth continued to evolve with new contracts focusing on protecting military families from cybersecurity threats and financial exploitation. My experience with Derek's systematic betrayal provided insights that proved valuable for developing security protocols that protected service members' personal information and financial assets from criminal targeting. The final vindication came when Derek was required to provide testimony for congressional hearings about protecting military families. Watching him explain his criminal actions to United States senators while wearing a federal prison uniform and acknowledging that he had targeted someone whose service had generated billions in defense technology value provided closure that exceeded any personal revenge I could have imagined. Derek had wanted to steal my inheritance and leave me financially destroyed, believing that military deployment made me vulnerable to systematic exploitation. Instead, his betrayal had revealed resources and capabilities that enabled me to dismantle an entire criminal enterprise while establishing permanent protections for other military families. The man who thought he was destroying a helpless military wife had actually triggered the creation of a military family protection system that would prevent thousands of other service members from experiencing similar betrayal. Sometimes the most devastating revenge isn't personal destruction. It's creating lasting change that ensures no one else suffers the same injustice. Pierce had built his criminal empire on the premise that military families were inherently vulnerable, targets who lacked the resources to fight back effectively. My case proved that underestimating American service members and their families was the most expensive mistake any criminal could make. Justice wasn't just served. It was systematized, ensuring that Derek and Pierce's betrayal would be the last successful operation of its kind against American military families. 5 years after Derek thought he had executed the perfect financial assassination against his deployed wife, I stood in the Pentagon briefing room where my original Aegis defense contract had been negotiated. But this time, I wasn't there as a soldier seeking approval for classified technology. I was there as the founder and CEO of the Carter Foundation for Military Family Security, presenting a comprehensive report to Defense Secretary Patricia Williams about the systematic protection systems we had established for military families worldwide. The transformation had been extraordinary and far-reaching. What began as my personal quest for justice against Derek and Pierce had evolved into a fundamental restructuring of how military families were protected from financial exploitation during deployments. The foundation that bore my name had become the premier organization specializing in identifying, investigating, and prosecuting crimes against military families with resources and capabilities that exceeded most federal agencies. Mrs. Carter, your foundation's work has identified and dismantled 47 criminal enterprises targeting military families across 6 countries, Secretary Williams noted. Reviewing the comprehensive report my team had prepared, the systematic approach you've developed has become the international standard for protecting service members' families from deployment-related crimes. The numbers were staggering, but represented real families whose lives had been saved from the kind of systematic destruction Derek and Pierce had attempted against me. The Foundation employed over 200 former intelligence officers, federal investigators, military attorneys, and specialized financial analysts who worked exclusively on cases involving crimes against military families. Our annual budget of $500 million, funded by my Aegis earnings and subsequent defense technology contracts, had made us the most well-resourced private organization dedicated to protecting service members. The technological infrastructure we had developed was revolutionary. Using advanced data analysis techniques I had refined during my military intelligence work, the Foundation maintained comprehensive databases that tracked financial patterns, legal activities, and social media behaviors that indicated potential threats to military families. Our early warning systems could identify suspicious activities targeting military spouses months before actual crimes occurred, allowing us to implement protective measures and coordinate with law enforcement agencies. Elena Vasquez had become the Foundation's Director of Intelligence Operations, leading a team that rivaled federal agencies in their capability to investigate complex financial crimes. Her department maintained relationships with intelligence agencies in 17 countries, sharing information about criminal enterprises that specifically targeted military families, and coordinating international prosecutions of organizations that exploited service members during deployments. The most significant development has been our predictive analysis capabilities. Elena explained during the Pentagon briefing, we can now identify military families that are being targeted for systematic exploitation up to 18 months before actual crimes occur. This allows us to implement protective measures, provide enhanced legal representation, and coordinate with federal agencies to build prosecution cases against criminal enterprises before they can successfully destroy families. Marcus Thompson had established our Physical Security Division, which provided comprehensive protection services for military families facing threats from criminal organizations. His team included former Special Forces operators, federal agents, and specialized security contractors who understood the unique vulnerabilities that military deployment created for service members' families. The division had prevented over 300 attempted crimes against military families and had successfully prosecuted the criminals involved in systematic targeting operations. The legal framework we had developed was perhaps our most lasting contribution to military family protection. Rebecca Chen had become our chief legal counsel, leading a team of attorneys who specialized in military family law and had successfully established new legal precedents that made it significantly more difficult for criminals to exploit deployment-related vulnerabilities. Our legal advocacy had resulted in federal legislation that specifically enhanced protections for military families and established severe penalties for crimes committed against service members during deployments. The educational component of our work had reached hundreds of thousands of military families worldwide. We had developed comprehensive training programs that taught service members and their families how to identify and prevent systematic financial exploitation, how to secure assets during deployments, and how to access emergency legal and financial assistance when facing criminal targeting. Our educational materials had been adopted by military family support organizations throughout NATO and allied nations. But perhaps the most satisfying aspect of our work was the direct impact on individual families who faced the same kind of systematic betrayal that Derek had attempted against me. The Foundation maintained a 24-hour emergency response capability that could deploy investigative teams, legal representation, and financial assistance to any military family facing criminal exploitation within 48 hours of initial contact. The case files that crossed my desk told stories that echoed my own experience, but demonstrated how much more effective our protective systems had become. Military spouses who discovered their partner's systematic theft during deployments now had immediate access to resources that could recover stolen assets, document criminal activities, and coordinate with federal prosecutors to ensure comprehensive justice. The Foundation's intervention rate was remarkable. Over 93% of military families who contacted us for assistance successfully recovered their stolen assets and achieved prosecution of the criminals involved. The international expansion of our work had been particularly meaningful. Military families serving overseas faced additional vulnerabilities due to foreign legal systems and cultural barriers that criminals often exploited. The Foundation had established partnerships with allied military organizations and international law enforcement agencies to provide comprehensive protection for American service members stationed abroad. Our international offices in 15 countries provided immediate assistance and coordinated with local authorities to prosecute crimes against American military families. The technological innovations we had developed were being adopted by law enforcement agencies worldwide. The financial analysis algorithms I had created for detecting systematic theft patterns were now used by federal agencies to investigate complex fraud cases involving military families. Our communication monitoring systems helped identify criminal enterprises that specifically targeted military communities, while our legal databases provided comprehensive resources for prosecutors handling military family crimes. The personnel who had joined the Foundation represented the highest caliber of professionals who understood the unique challenges faced by military families. Many were former service members who had experienced deployment-related challenges themselves, while others were specialists who had dedicated their careers to protecting military communities. The combination of personal understanding and professional expertise created an organization that could respond to military family crises with unprecedented effectiveness and comprehension. The funding model we had established ensured the foundation's permanent sustainability. While my initial Aegis contract provided startup resources, the foundation had developed multiple revenue streams, including consulting contracts with defense agencies, licensing agreements for our technological innovations, and partnerships with military support organizations worldwide. The Foundation's financial independence meant that our protective services would continue indefinitely, regardless of political changes or budget constraints that often affected government programs. The research and development component of our work continued to evolve as criminals developed new methods for exploiting military families. Our research division, led by former Pentagon analysts, studied emerging threats and developed countermeasures that stayed ahead of criminal innovations. This proactive approach meant that we could often prevent new types of crimes against military families before they became widespread problems. The collaboration with federal agencies had created unprecedented coordination in protecting military families from criminal exploitation. The Foundation maintained formal partnerships with the FBI, Department of Justice, Department of Defense, and multiple international law enforcement organizations. These relationships meant that military families facing criminal targeting had immediate access to both private resources and federal law enforcement capabilities, creating a comprehensive protective network that criminals found virtually impossible to overcome. The memorial component of our work honored military families who had been destroyed by criminal enterprises before our protective systems existed. The Foundation maintained a comprehensive database of families who had suffered from deployment-related crimes, ensuring that their experiences contributed to preventing similar tragedies for other military families. These cases provided ongoing motivation for our work and reminded us of the real human costs of criminal enterprises that targeted service members. The training programs we had developed for law enforcement agencies ensured that police departments and federal agencies understood the unique aspects of crimes against military families. These specialized training modules helped investigators recognize patterns of military family targeting and provided them with resources for building effective prosecution cases. The Foundation's law enforcement training had been adopted by agencies in 23 states and 6 allied countries. The legislative advocacy component of our work had achieved remarkable success in establishing enhanced legal protections for military families. The Foundation's legal team had successfully lobbied for federal legislation that specifically addressed crimes against service members during deployments, created enhanced penalties for systematic financial exploitation of military families, and established comprehensive victim assistance programs funded by federal agencies. The personal satisfaction of seeing Derek serve his federal prison sentence while knowing that his crime had triggered the creation of protective systems that would prevent thousands of other military families from suffering similar betrayal provided a sense of justice that exceeded anything I could have imagined during those first dark days when I discovered his systematic theft. Derek had intended to destroy my life and leave me financially ruined, but his betrayal had actually become the foundation for protecting military families worldwide. The Foundation had become my life's work and the most meaningful application of both my military training and the financial resources that Derek had tried to steal. Every family we helped, every criminal enterprise we dismantled, every protective system we established represented a permanent victory against people who chose to exploit American service members and their families. Derek's betrayal had taught me that the most devastating revenge wasn't personal destruction, but systematic change that ensured no one else would suffer the same injustice. The Carter Foundation for Military Family Security had become that systematic change. protecting military families with resources and capabilities that criminals could never overcome. 10 years after Derek walked out of our Colorado Springs home, believing he had perfectly executed my financial destruction, I stood before a joint session of Congress as they voted to establish the Military Family Protection Act into permanent federal law. The legislation, which had grown directly from the Foundation's decade of work protecting service members, would create the most comprehensive safeguards for military families in American history. The journey from betrayed Army captain to recognized expert on military family security had been extraordinary. But the moment that provided the deepest satisfaction came 3 months earlier when Derek was released from federal prison after serving his full 18-year sentence. He emerged to discover that his ex-wife had become one of the most influential advocates for military families in the United States. While he faced a lifetime of supervised release, permanent financial monitoring, and complete exclusion from any activities involving military communities. Derek's release had been carefully monitored by the Foundation's security team, not because we feared him, but because his case had become a teaching example used in federal law enforcement training programs nationwide. The systematic way he had been recruited, coached, and guided through the process of destroying a military family provided crucial insights that helped investigators identify and prevent similar criminal enterprises. The first thing Derek discovered upon release was that every aspect of his post-prison life would be shaped by the consequences of targeting someone whose service had generated billions in defense technology value. His supervised release conditions included permanent financial monitoring, restrictions on internet usage, and complete prohibition from any contact with military families or communities. The probation requirements essentially made him a permanent outcast from the Colorado Springs area, where military families represented a significant portion of the population. More significantly, Derek discovered that his criminal record made him unemployable in his former profession. The architecture industry had adopted comprehensive background screening procedures developed by the Foundation specifically to identify individuals who had committed crimes against military families. These screenings were now standard practice for any position that involved contact with military communities, effectively ending Derek's career in his chosen field. The financial restitution requirements that continued throughout his supervised release ensured that Derek would spend the next decade making monthly payments to military family support organizations. The calculated irony was perfect. The man who had tried to steal my assets to fund his affair was now required to contribute his earnings to help other military families avoid the destruction he had attempted to cause. But Derek's personal consequences were insignificant compared to the systematic changes that had emerged from his crime. The Foundation had grown into an international organization with offices in 37 countries protecting military families from criminal exploitation worldwide. Our annual budget had expanded to over $800 million, funded by continued defense technology contracts and partnerships with allied military organizations. The technological innovations we had developed were now standard equipment for military family protection agencies worldwide. The financial monitoring systems I had created could detect suspicious activities targeting military families in real time, while our legal databases provided comprehensive resources for prosecutors handling crimes against service members. The Foundation's early warning systems had prevented over 14,000 attempted crimes against military families across 6 continents. Elena Vasquez had been appointed as the first director of military family security for the Department of Defense, a new position created specifically to coordinate protective services for service members' families. Her appointment represented the institutionalization of protective measures that had grown directly from our private Foundation work. The federal government now maintained the same capabilities for protecting military families that we had pioneered through private resources. Marcus Thompson had established the Thompson Institute for Military Family Security, a specialized training facility that prepared law enforcement officers, federal agents, and international investigators to handle crimes against military families. The institute had trained over 8,000 professionals who now worked specifically on protecting service members from criminal exploitation. Rebecca Chen had been appointed to the Federal Court of Appeals, where her expertise in military family law had established new legal precedents that made it virtually impossible for criminals to successfully exploit deployment-related vulnerabilities. Her judicial decisions had created comprehensive legal frameworks that protected military families while ensuring that criminals faced maximum penalties for targeting service members. The Foundation's work had expanded beyond simple crime prevention to comprehensive family support services that addressed every aspect of military life. Our programs provided financial counseling, legal assistance, emergency support, educational resources, and even career development services for military spouses. The goal was to create military families that were so well informed and well protected that criminal targeting became essentially impossible. The educational component of our work had reached over 2 million military families worldwide. Our comprehensive training programs taught service members how to protect their assets during deployments, how to identify potential threats, and how to access immediate assistance when facing criminal targeting. The educational materials had been translated into 23 languages and adapted for military families serving in diverse cultural environments. The memorial component of our work honored the estimated 400 military families who had been destroyed by criminal enterprises before our protective systems existed. The Foundation maintained detailed records of these cases, ensuring that their experiences continued to inform our protective strategies and provide motivation for ongoing work. These family sacrifices had contributed to creating systems that protected thousands of other military families from similar destruction. The international partnerships we had established created unprecedented coordination in protecting American military families stationed overseas. The Foundation maintained formal agreements with law enforcement agencies in 42 countries, ensuring that American service members had immediate access to protective resources, regardless of their duty location. These partnerships had successfully prosecuted criminal enterprises that specifically targeted American military families in foreign countries. The Research and Development Division continued to evolve our protective capabilities as criminals developed new methods for exploiting military families. Our analysts studied emerging threats including cybersecurity attacks, identity theft operations, and sophisticated financial fraud schemes that specifically targeted military communities. This proactive approach meant that we could often prevent new types of crimes before they became widespread problems. The legislative advocacy work had achieved remarkable success in establishing enhanced protections for military families worldwide. The Military Family Protection Act that Congress was voting to establish would create federal funding for comprehensive protective services, mandate enhanced background screenings for anyone working with military families, and establish severe penalties for systematic crimes against service members. The personal transformation that had resulted from Derrick's betrayal was perhaps the most profound aspect of the entire journey. The quiet Army intelligence officer who had trusted her husband completely had evolved into a recognized international expert on protecting military families from criminal exploitation. The Aegis contract that Derrick had never known about had provided the resources. But his betrayal had revealed capabilities and determination that transformed my understanding of what was possible. The Foundation had become more than an organization. It had become a permanent institution that would protect military families for generations. The systems we had established were now embedded in federal agencies, international law enforcement organizations, and military support structures worldwide. Derrick's crime had triggered the creation of protective measures that would prevent millions of military families from experiencing similar betrayal. The most satisfying aspect of our success was knowing that military families now had immediate access to resources that could neutralize any criminal enterprise targeting them. The 24-hour emergency response capability meant that no military family would ever face the kind of systematic destruction Derek had attempted. While our comprehensive protective systems ensured that criminals who targeted service members would face immediate and overwhelming opposition, Derek had intended to leave me financially ruined and emotionally destroyed, believing that military deployment made me vulnerable to systematic exploitation. Instead, his betrayal had revealed that attacking American service members was the most expensive mistake any criminal could make. The Foundation had become the permanent embodiment of that lesson, protecting military families with resources and capabilities that criminals could never overcome. Standing in the Capitol building as Congress voted to establish our protective measures into permanent federal law, I reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with Derek's betrayal in a military base hotel room 10 years earlier. The man who had thought he was destroying a helpless military wife had actually triggered the creation of the most comprehensive military family protection system in world history. The final vote was unanimous: 4,350 in the House, 100 in the Senate. The Military Family Protection Act would ensure that every American service member and their family would have access to the protective resources that Derek's crime had helped create. Military families would never again face the kind of systematic exploitation that criminals like Derek and Pierce had once practiced with impunity. Derek's perfect crime had become the foundation for perfect protection, ensuring that his betrayal would be remembered not as a successful criminal enterprise, but as the catalyst that created permanent safeguards for American military families worldwide. If this story of justice, transformation, and ultimate victory resonated with you, make sure to subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. Tomorrow, I've got an incredible story about a tech CEO who thought she destroyed her business partner's career, only to discover that her victim had secretly built a billion-dollar empire that would make her betrayal the costliest mistake in Silicon Valley history. You won't want to miss how a brilliant woman turned devastating corporate sabotage into the ultimate comeback story. Subscribe now, and I'll see you in the next one.